The village lay nestled between rolling hills where the winds carried the smell of earth after rain and the rustle of tall grasses sang with the voices of unseen spirits. Life here followed the rhythm of sun and moon, a steady beat of planting, harvesting, feasting, and mourning. The people were proud of their traditions, their songs carried to the night skies, their dances stamping into the ground the stories of those who had come before them. Yet, beneath the everyday laughter and quarrels of the villagers, there lingered an awareness, a quiet superstition that not all objects, not all inheritances were made equal. Among the woven baskets, clay pots, and wooden stools that passed from hand to hand, there existed relics that seemed to breathe with the unseen. One such relic lived in the hut of a young woman named Ianda. Ianda was unlike many of the girls her age, though her beauty was undeniable, with skin as rich as polished ebony and eyes that carried both softness and a strange, deep knowing. Her presence commanded silence at times, as though she carried more than her years. She lived alone, in a modest round hut near the edge of the village where the forest began to thicken, a place where children sometimes hesitated to go when the sun dipped too low. In her hut stood a mirror, framed with wood so dark it looked almost black, carved with lines that spiraled into shapes not easily named. It was said that her grandmother, a woman known for her wisdom and strange silences, had gifted it to her before she passed. Unlike other mirrors the villagers occasionally saw in the homes of chiefs who had traded with distant merchants, this one was not made of metal polished to shine. Its surface was glass, smooth yet deep, and when one gazed too long into it, it seemed not only to return the image of the face but to stretch beyond, like a pool whose depths were yet to be measured. From her childhood, Ianda had grown accustomed to the whispers the mirror carried. At first she thought it was the wind whistling through the cracks of her hut or the murmur of villagers outside. But when she pressed her ear closer to the glass, the sound became distinct, voices that did not belong to any she knew. They were not loud but soft, like the rustle of cloth or the hum of a distant song. At times they spoke her name, at times they recited words of wisdom she only understood years later, and at other moments they warned her, telling her to be careful of someone approaching, or guiding her on which path to walk. The voices belonged to her ancestors, she came to believe, those whose bones rested beneath the earth, those who had walked before her. This mirror was not a mere object. It was a vessel, a bridge between worlds where the living and the dead conversed. The village, however, treated the mirror with caution. They accepted Ianda's inheritance without much question, though children whispered rumors that her grandmother had been a witch. Some said the mirror showed not only truth but also misfortune, and that those who looked too closely into it might see their end. For this reason, few dared enter Ianda's hut unless necessity demanded it, and even then their eyes flickered away from the strange glass, never lingering for long. Ianda did not mind. She was content with her solitude, her days spent weaving mats, tending to her small garden, and listening to the whispers of the mirror that had become her secret companion. But her solitude did not mean she was untouched by the eyes of others. Some villagers envied her calm spirit, others feared what they did not understand. There were those who mocked her from a distance, saying that she talked to shadows, that her beauty was wasted on someone who did not laugh loudly at the market or dance eagerly at the festivals. They did not know that in the quiet of her hut, when the moonlight spilled across the mirror's face, she sometimes saw images flicker across its glass, visions of what had been and what was yet to come. She had once seen her neighbor's child drowning in the river, and though she had rushed to pull him out, earning the mother's thanks, the whispers in the village grew sharper after that. How did she know? Some asked. How could she see what was about to happen? Others whispered that the mirror gave her such knowledge at a price too dark to imagine. Ianda herself did not understand the full extent of the mirror's power, but she accepted it as one accepts the beat of their own heart. It was there, constant, pulsing, guiding her when the road was unclear. At times it comforted her, reminding her of her grandmother's lullabies, a soothing murmur that seemed to rise from the glass. At other times, it unsettled her, especially when she caught glimpses of faces she did not recognize, men with eyes like storms, women with scars that spoke of ancient battles. Were these truly her ancestors or spirits who wandered unbound? She could not tell, and yet, she trusted that whatever force resided within the mirror had chosen her for reasons not yet revealed. The seasons passed, and Ianda grew into her womanhood with the mirror ever at her side. It reflected not only her changing face but her growth in wisdom and resilience. While other girls adorned themselves with beads and painted their faces in bright colors for festivals, Ianda's beauty remained simple, yet luminous, as if she carried light within her. Her mirror reminded her that beauty was not only in adornment but in truth, and truth was never without weight. The whispers often reminded her of this. To carry truth is to carry burden, they said. The villagers' unease simmered quietly, but in the natural way of communities bound by proximity, their curiosity sometimes overcame their fear. Once, a group of young boys dared each other to peek into Ayanda's hut while she was away at the river. They slipped inside, giggling until their eyes fell upon the mirror. One boy, braver than the rest, stepped forward and peered into it. His laughter died in his throat, his face drained of color, and he stumbled backward, screaming that he had seen his father's grave open wide though his father was still alive. The boys fled, spreading the story like wildfire. From then on, the villagers spoke less openly of Ayanda, but in hushed tones as if her mirror had ears that could carry tales back to her. Still, Ayanda remained untouched by malice. She continued her life with quiet dignity, though she felt the weight of being different. She loved the earth, the forest, the river, and the sky. She loved the way the sun painted the hills gold each morning and the way the stars carved paths in the night. Yet always, when she looked into her mirror, she knew she was never truly alone. The ancestors were there, waiting, watching, whispering. The mirror was more than glass. It was a keeper of truths, a witness to generations, and Ayanda, whether she desired it or not, was its guardian. Ayanda's gift with the mirror was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. She did not wave her hands or speak in riddles. She simply watched, listened, and sometimes whispered guidance to those who came seeking her. Villagers arrived with questions of all kinds: illnesses that did not respond to herbal remedies, missing livestock, disputes that threatened to boil into violence. Ayanda would sit quietly, her eyes tracing the surface of the mirror as if reading a language written in the play of light and shadow. Often she would hum softly, a tune her grandmother had taught her, and the mirror seemed to respond, shimmering faintly, ripples crossing its glassy surface. In these moments she would find the answers or sense the path forward, telling the villagers what she saw or gently guiding them to their own solutions. It became clear over time that her gift was not merely observation. The mirror's whispers revealed things hidden from ordinary sight: a broken wheel that would soon crush a cart, a child wandering near the river, or a hidden illness spreading quietly through a family. Ayanda did not take credit for these revelations. She offered only her advice and quietly ensured that the right actions were taken to prevent disaster. And yet, as is often the way with gifts, admiration and fear walked hand in hand. The villagers began to notice that she seemed to know things before anyone else, and that her predictions rarely faltered. With every success, envy grew. Some elders whispered that her talent was unnatural, that no mortal should see beyond the present. Women who had once sought her guidance now eyed her with suspicion, wondering whether she could peer into their secrets, their lies, their private failings. Men who had scoffed at her as a young girl, calling her quiet and soft, began to mutter behind her back that perhaps the mirror gave her powers that might tip the scales of justice unfairly. The village square, once a place of open laughter and debate, became a place where Ayanda's presence inspired wary glances. Children who had once run to her for playful tales hesitated when she passed. Even their laughter carried a hint of tension, a reverence born from fear they barely understood. Ayanda herself sensed the change but did not alter her ways. She continued her daily routines with the same devotion, tending her garden, mending clothes, fetching water, and listening to the mirror. She treated every villager with courtesy and kindness, never raising her voice or displaying anger, and yet she could feel the shift in their hearts. The mirror, in its silent way, reflected this tension back to her. Sometimes it hummed faintly, a vibration she had come to recognize as caution or warning. At other times she felt a subtle pulse, almost like a heartbeat, alerting her to the envy stirring in someone nearby. She understood that her gift was both a blessing and a burden. It allowed her to protect and guide, but it also made her a target for jealousy and suspicion. Word of Ayanda's abilities spread beyond the immediate village. Travelers spoke of the girl who could see danger before it struck, who healed the sick with guidance drawn from a reflective glass, who soothed quarrels with words that seemed to carry the weight of foresight. Some came with reverence, offering small gifts and gratitude. Others came with fear, eyes narrowed, lips tight, questioning whether she used dark powers to influence events for her own gain. These whispers, half awe and half suspicion, wound their way through the village, reaching ears that listened with growing unease. The elders began to convene in secret, debating whether Ayanda's influence was acceptable or whether it threatened the delicate balance of tradition and authority. Despite the growing tension, Ayanda's heart remained pure. She never sought to manipulate outcomes for personal gain. When the mirror revealed a danger approaching the village, she would guide people to safety without fanfare. When she saw a secret feud brewing, she would intervene subtly, planting words or gestures that allowed reconciliation without exposing the motives of either party. Her days were long and filled with responsibility, and the nights were spent listening to the mirror, learning its rhythms, interpreting its whispers. Yet the more she gave, the more the seeds of fear grew in those who watched, unwilling or unable to understand the depth of her compassion and the neutrality of her guidance. One afternoon, a farmer approached her, distraught over the sudden death of his goats. He suspected foul play from a neighboring family, but Ayanda, consulting the mirror, saw the true cause, a blight in the grasslands where the animals had grazed. She guided him to a safe pasture and provided herbs to aid the sick. The farmer left in relief and gratitude, but some of the other villagers saw the interaction differently. They muttered that she had influenced the outcome unfairly, that she had chosen who would be saved and who would suffer, and that perhaps her guidance was more than simple foresight. Slowly, a chorus of whispered doubts began to follow her. At night, when the village slept, Ayanda would sit alone by her mirror, reflecting on the dual nature of her gift. She realized that power, any power, was rarely received without fear or envy, and that those who were threatened by it often sought to undermine it quietly. She accepted this, understanding that her role was not to win approval but to remain steadfast, to use the mirror wisely and to act with integrity. Each time she looked into the glass, the ancestral whispers reassured her, reminding her that vigilance and compassion must walk together. And as the moonlight spilled across her hut, touching the mirror's surface, Ayanda felt a quiet certainty. The whispers and visions were not hers alone. They were a responsibility, a legacy, a force that would guide, protect, and, when necessary, expose the hearts of those who opposed what was just. It was in this delicate balance of gift and burden that Ayanda's life unfolded. She became a figure both revered and feared, her presence a constant reminder that true insight carried weight beyond comprehension. Villagers whispered of her as she passed in the market, and some avoided her gaze entirely, wary of what truths she might see. And yet, even amid the envy and fear, she continued, quietly steadfast, listening to the mirror, guiding the village, and walking the narrow line between compassion and caution. The unease that had begun as whispers in shadowed corners of the village grew into deliberate plotting. Those who envied Ayanda, elders who feared her influence, neighbors who resented her insight, and even a few close relatives who felt their authority challenged, convened secretly in the dead of night. Torches flickered against mud brick walls as they huddled together, voices low but urgent, each word dripping with resentment. They spoke of the girl with the mirror, of her uncanny foresight and the power that seemed to radiate from her very presence. They had watched her avert disasters, heal the sick and calm disputes, and each act, however quiet or subtle, felt like a slight against them, a reminder of their impotence. The mirror, they reasoned, was the source of this unnatural influence. Destroy it and Ayanda's gift would vanish, leaving her powerless and ordinary. Plans were drawn, hands shaking with both anticipation and fear. They imagined the mirror smashed, the silvered glass fractured, its ancestral whispers silenced forever. One of the elders suggested they wait until she slept, to strike when she was defenseless, ensuring she could do nothing to stop them. Another argued that confronting her in the day would make them vulnerable to her influence. The group debated in whispers, each conspirator attempting to outdo the others in their cleverness, yet all fueled by a common purpose: to obliterate the source of Ayanda's power. On the chosen night, the conspirators moved as a single unit, cloaked against the moonless sky. They approached Ayanda's hut with the careful precision of predators, but their hearts thumped with nervous anticipation. Even as they crept along the path, the wind seemed to hush, carrying their footfalls across the silent village. Ayanda sat inside, unaware of the gathering storm outside her door, her fingers tracing patterns along the mirror's edge, listening to the gentle whispers that guided her through the night. The mirror shimmered faintly in the lamplight, reflecting the calm and wisdom that had become her hallmarks. With a coordinated motion, they forced the door open, the hinges groaning under the sudden pressure. Ayanda looked up, sensing immediately the malice in their approach. Her eyes met theirs, and though her expression remained calm, a quiet tension filled the room. The intruders hesitated for a moment, unnerved by the serenity she radiated, but the elder's voice cut through their hesitation. "Break it," he commanded, and with that the conspirators advanced, their hands gripping the edge of the mirror with intent to shatter it. A deafening crack split the silence as the first blow struck the glass. Silvered fragments flew in every direction, some embedding in the floor, some bouncing off the walls, and others scattering across Ayanda's skin. The smell of burning metal and splintered wood filled the hut, mingling with the faint hum that had always accompanied the mirror's presence. The intruders thought triumph filled the air, believing the mirror's power extinguished with each shattering fragment. They laughed, jeered, and exchanged glances of satisfaction, convinced they had ended the girl's gift for good. But Ianda remained still. She did not scream, did not panic, did not flinch. The mirror lay in ruin before her, its ancestral whispers reduced to scattered echoes, yet her connection to its power did not fade. Instead, a strange silence enveloped the room, heavy and charged. The shards on the floor shimmered faintly, edges glinting as if resisting the hand that had sought to destroy them. Ianda inhaled deeply, feeling the pulse of the remnants beneath her fingers, sensing that the essence of the mirror, the gift it had bestowed, was not bound to its physical form. Panic began to ripple through the conspirators as they noticed subtle changes. The air in the hut thickened, a hum vibrating through their bones. Each movement they made seemed sluggish, as though the room itself resisted their intentions. The shards of the mirror shifted minutely, not enough to harm but enough to unsettle them. Their triumphant laughter faltered, replaced by unease and whispered fears. It's not over," one muttered, voice trembling. Another swore the fragments had moved on their own, aligning in patterns that mimicked the mirror's face. Ianda rose slowly, her presence commanding, unshaken by the destruction around her. She surveyed the intruders with a quiet intensity that made them falter, their eyes darting to the shards at their feet. She did not need words, the room seemed to speak for her. Every fragment that had been smashed shimmered faintly, reflecting distorted images of the conspirators themselves. Fear, greed, envy etched upon their faces. Each saw in the glass a truth they could not escape. The power of the mirror, once thought destroyed, now seemed entwined with her very being, responding not to the object but to the purity of her intent. The elder, emboldened for a moment, stepped forward to strike a final blow at the largest shard, believing that this would end it completely. But as his hand neared the glass, the shard quivered violently. A sliver of light shot out, striking his palm and causing him to recoil with a cry of shock. Others stumbled, tripping over scattered fragments, their movements chaotic and uncoordinated. It was as if the mirror or the spirit within it had awakened fully, defending the girl it had chosen to empower. Fear gripped the conspirators. The initial arrogance and cruelty that had guided them were replaced by desperation. Hands trembled as they tried to gather the shards or flee, but the mirror's influence held sway over the room. Some felt phantom whispers echoing their own sins back to them, others glimpsed visions of the consequences of their envy. The realization struck: destroying the glass had not ended Ianda's gift, it had only awakened it in a new, more potent form. Finally, defeated and shaken, the conspirators fled into the night, leaving the shattered fragments behind. Ianda remained, her hands brushing over the broken pieces, feeling the ancestral whispers now coursing through her in a way that was more intimate, more personal, and more unyielding than ever before. The mirror itself lay broken, yet its essence thrummed stronger than it had before, fused with her spirit. The village, though unaware of the full extent of what had occurred, would sense a change in the days to come. The calm authority in Ianda's presence, the quiet awe and fear that now accompanied her guidance, and the knowledge that her power could not be undone by physical destruction. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through the village. Those who had attacked her found themselves unnerved by inexplicable misfortunes. Tools were lost, arguments escalated without reason, and a quiet tension hung in the air wherever they went. Others began to approach Ianda with both reverence and caution, sensing that her power was now deeper, more absolute, and not bound to the fragile glass they had tried to destroy. The act of breaking the mirror had, paradoxically, solidified her gift and established her as a figure whose insight could not be challenged by envy, fear, or brute force. The morning after the mirror's shattering, the villagers approached Ianda's hut cautiously. Dawn mist curled around the mud brick walls, but there was no sound of the usual early bustle. The village seemed muted, as if holding its breath. Inside, Ianda walked among the scattered shards, her bare feet brushing the edges lightly, careful yet unafraid. The fragments glimmered faintly, catching the weak sunlight filtering through the window, and each reflected not just the room, but fragments of intentions, fears, and sins of those who had sought to destroy her. The conspirators who had wielded malice against her the previous night began to notice subtle injuries. The elder who had pressed his hand against the largest shard awoke with burns not only on his skin but in his mind, a lingering sense of guilt and dread that gnawed at his thoughts. His hand throbbed, but the pain extended beyond flesh. It was an ache of conscience, a deep awareness of his own cowardice and envy. Each time he moved, the shard's memory seemed to flicker in his mind's eye, a silent accusation that could not be avoided. The others fared no better. A villager who had snatched a small sliver from the floor found his hand swelling, and when he tried to speak of it, his words stumbled and fell into nonsense. Even those who had only brushed against the shards accidentally felt the cuts, tiny at first, shallow scratches, but they burned with a strange intensity. More unnerving still, shadows of what they had done lingered in their minds, memories twisting into visions of themselves suffering at the hands of the girl they had tried to humiliate. The shards had absorbed not only the reflection of their bodies but also the echo of their intent, and now they were delivering justice in the sharpest, most personal way possible. Word spread quickly through the village. Children whispered to each other about the dangerous fragments, parents kept their distance, and merchants avoided Ayanda's path, fearful of touching even a fallen splinter. Those who had been complicit in the mirror's destruction began to tremble at the mere thought of entering her hut. Some slept fitfully, waking drenched in sweat with visions of silver shards slicing through the air toward their hands and faces. Others reported hearing whispers in their ears at odd moments, reminders of every unkind thought and secret malice they had harbored. Ayanda, however, walked with serene confidence. She seemed unaffected by the shard's latent power, and those who glimpsed her in the morning light noted how she moved as if in harmony with the fragments themselves. The shards had not only preserved their ancestral magic, but they had fused more deeply with her presence. When she reached out, they seemed to respond, tilting slightly in her hand or shimmering brighter when she lingered near them. Their revenge was not mindless or chaotic, it was precise as if guided by her silent will, and yet she did not raise them in anger. Each act of retribution occurred without her overt command, a natural consequence of the cruelty that had been inflicted. The elder, once the most confident of her tormentors, was the first to confront the full power of the shards. Attempting to steal one from the pile as a trophy of his so-called victory, he felt the glass cut deeply across his palm. But as the blood began to stain the floor, the pain spread to his mind, a burning awareness of every slight, every jealousy, every whisper against Ayanda. He stumbled backward, clutching his head as visions flashed before his eyes, the girl's calm face, the shards moving with a strange intent, and himself suffering at their merciless edge. By the time he reached the doorway he was pale, trembling, and utterly broken in spirit, no longer able to maintain the authority he had once wielded. Others who had touched the shards fared similarly. One of the younger villagers, whose curiosity had outweighed his caution, picked up a small fragment. Immediately the glass cut him, leaving a shallow gash, but the worst was mental, a flood of visions of his own misdeeds, amplified and relentless. He cried out, not only in pain but in horror at the glimpses of what awaited him if he continued his envy and cruelty. He dropped the shard, but the sensation lingered, an unshakable reminder of the cost of malice. The shards had become instruments of moral correction, exacting a toll that was both tangible and spiritual, leaving those who touched them shaken, repentant, or utterly broken. Outside, villagers began to whisper among themselves about the miracle, or curse, of the shards. They spoke of how even without Ayanda's overt command, the fragments seemed alive, capable of punishing greed and malice while leaving the innocent unharmed. The story spread from house to house, and the fear it instilled became a quiet governance of morality. Those who had once plotted against Ayanda now avoided the hut, speaking only in hushed tones, careful to keep their hands and hearts clean. Even as the shards wreaked their subtle vengeance, Ayanda moved among them with grace, treating each with reverence. She understood that the mirror's power was not merely for punishment, it was a reflection of human intent, a measure of conscience made manifest. She did not revel in their suffering, she allowed the shards to serve as reminders of the consequences of envy, cruelty, and malice. In her presence, the shards became more than broken glass, they were instruments of wisdom, enforcing balance and justice without her needing to lift a finger. By the end of the week, the village had changed. The conspirators were humbled, their hands scarred and minds uneasy. Even those who had remained neutral felt the weight of the shard's silent power. Children were warned never to touch what lay in Ayanda's hut, elders reconsidered their authority, and neighbors began to show her respect tinged with fear. The broken mirror, once thought defeated, had proven indestructible in its essence. Each shard, sharper than before, carried not just physical menace but a spiritual authority that no human could override. Ayanda herself became a living testament to the shard's enduring power. Walking through the village, she carried the shards carefully, ensuring none fell into the wrong hands. Her calm demeanor and careful handling reinforced the lesson that power, when wielded with conscience, could turn violence and envy back upon themselves. The Shards' revenge was complete, not through mindless destruction, but through measured, inevitable justice that mirrored the purity of Ayanda's spirit. Thus, the shattered mirror became more than a broken artifact. It was a moral compass, a reminder that cruelty carries consequences sharper than steel and that even in fragments, truth and justice can prevail. Those who had wronged her learned the cost of envy and malice firsthand, and the village slowly absorbed the lesson. The girl and her shards were to be feared not for caprice, but for the unerring justice they represented. After the shattered mirror had settled and the shards' justice had been meted out, Ayanda stood in the quiet of her hut, breathing in the scent of old wood and sun-warmed dust. The mirror's frame lay in splinters around her feet, but she felt no loss. Something within her had shifted, a subtle awakening that made the glass redundant. Slowly, her vision seemed to draw inward, and when she looked upon her own reflection in a small polished bowl of water, she noticed her eyes beginning to shimmer with an ethereal silver light. They reflected not just the surface of things, but the hidden truths beneath, the hearts and intentions of those who approached her. It was as though the shards, though broken, had transferred their power into her very being. Where once she had relied on glass to reveal the unseen, now her gaze pierced directly into the essence of people, places, and events. A visitor approaching the hut could carry a mask of civility, yet Ayanda could see the tremor of greed, the flicker of envy, or the warmth of genuine kindness. Even intentions buried deep beneath years of pretense and habit were laid bare before her. The silver of her eyes was not a light that illuminated the room, it was a light that illuminated reality itself. Villagers who came to her cautiously noticed the change immediately. Those who had previously tried to deceive or manipulate her flinched under her gaze. Lies seemed to twist visibly, like shadows curling away from the brightness of her eyes. They found themselves unable to maintain falsehoods, involuntarily revealing their secrets, thoughts, or misdeeds in subtle ways. Some who had thought themselves clever enough to hide wrongdoing now felt stripped bare simply by meeting her eyes. Ayanda herself marveled at the precision of this newfound sight. She could sense not just malice, but the intentions of every action before it was taken. A farmer bending to water a field, a child sneaking a treat, even the rustle of wind through the trees carried stories, all readable if she focused deeply. Her mind was no longer merely reactive, it was attuned to the truth that coursed beneath appearances. The shards had been a catalyst, but she was now the source of perception itself, the living instrument of insight that needed no reflection to validate its power. This transformation altered how she interacted with the village. Ayanda no longer needed to hold the mirror to guide decisions or warn against deception. She could feel the sway of rumors, the subtle manipulations among neighbors, and the genuine intentions behind acts of kindness. Her advice became even more sought after because people sensed that her counsel was grounded not in opinion, but in the pure, unflinching knowledge of reality. Those who had once feared or envied her for the mirror now found themselves awestruck by the natural authority that radiated from her silver eyes. Yet with this power came a heavy responsibility. Ayanda understood that piercing insight could not be wielded recklessly. The truth could wound as sharply as the shards had. She learned to temper her guidance with patience and compassion, revealing only what was necessary for justice or protection. She became both guardian and observer, a silent arbiter whose presence alone maintained balance within the village. Even the elders who had once conspired against her dared not challenge her. They could sense that her sight saw through all pretense and that any further malice would be met with an awareness they could not evade. Over time, the villagers adjusted to her presence. Children were warned to approach her with respect, and neighbors sought her judgment when disputes arose. They spoke quietly of her silver eyes, now the defining feature of her persona, and the awe surrounding her grew into legend. Ayanda's transformation marked not only a personal metamorphosis but also a shift in the moral center of the community. The lessons of envy, cruelty, and justice were no longer tied to a fragile mirror, they resided within her. Even her closest friends recognized a profound change. Where she had once relied on tools, rituals, or artifacts, she now carried the truth internally. The silver light of her eyes was a constant, vigilant presence, revealing corruption, deceit, and danger long before it could manifest. She became an emblem of moral clarity, a living reminder that power rooted in awareness and fairness could not be broken, and that true sight came not from reflective surfaces but from understanding and integrity. Ayanda's inner vision also brought serenity. No longer bound to physical reflections, she saw patterns in the village, in nature, and in human behavior. She could sense impending storms, both in weather and in relationships, and guide people accordingly. The villagers came to trust her instincts as they once trusted the mirror, Yet her advice now carried an unshakable authority, tempered by the wisdom that came from experience and observation. In the nights that followed, Ayanda often sat beneath the open sky, letting the silver glow of her eyes blend with the moonlight. She felt a connection not only to the village and its people but also to the world at large, the living patterns of life, the rhythm of seasons, and the subtle shifts of fortune and fate. She no longer needed a mirror to reflect truth, she had become the mirror itself, a lens through which the village and the world could glimpse clarity, justice, and balance. Through this transformation, Ayanda's story spread. People from distant regions would speak of the girl whose eyes could see through all deception, whose wisdom came not from glass, but from the depths of her own perception. The silver in her gaze became a symbol of moral vision, the assurance that no hidden cruelty or envy could escape notice. She had transcended the Shards' power, inheriting their ability fully, yet with the calm and discipline to ensure it served the good rather than vengeance. The morning sun rose over the village slowly, its light softening the shadows that had stretched across the streets the night before. The events surrounding the shattered mirror had left a lingering tension in every corner, every home. Villagers who had once whispered behind closed doors about the young woman's powers now spoke in hushed awe, the memory of the Shards' vengeance still vivid in their minds. Even the bravest among them felt the weight of the lessons they had learned. Fear had transformed overnight into a cautious respect, and that respect began to grow into reverence. For generations, the mirror had been an object of fascination and suspicion. Some had envied the young woman's connection to it, others had feared it might expose their secret misdeeds. They had sought to destroy it, believing that if the glass were gone, so too would vanish her insight, her ability to guide and correct the course of their village. But as the sun rose and as Ayanda, her eyes now glowing silver, moved calmly among them, it became clear that the mirror's destruction had not diminished her. If anything, it had revealed the depth of her wisdom and the magnitude of the gift she carried within herself. The villagers began to gather in small clusters, eyes darting toward Ayanda as she walked through the streets. She did not raise her voice or command attention, but her presence alone carried a quiet authority that could not be ignored. She greeted neighbors with a soft nod, her silver gaze briefly meeting theirs, and in that instant, they felt as though she could perceive their heart's intentions, their unspoken thoughts, and even the tiniest flicker of greed or kindness. It was not a gaze of punishment but one of understanding, one that invited them to reflect on their actions and motives. The villagers could no longer dismiss her as merely a girl with a strange artifact. They understood she embodied the mirror's wisdom itself. As Ayanda passed through the central square, a hush fell. Children paused mid-play, elders stopped mid-conversation, and the merchants setting up their stalls momentarily froze. Even those who had conspired to break the mirror could not avert their eyes. They remembered the Shards' sharp vengeance, the cuts that had left both physical and emotional marks, and a shiver ran down their spines. The lesson had been learned. Power born of truth and integrity could not be destroyed by malice. They saw now that the mirror's purpose had never been to intimidate or harm, but to reflect reality, to guide, and to reveal what needed to be seen. Villagers began approaching Ayanda with requests and questions, each seeking clarity about situations that had previously confounded them. The merchant who had been cheated by a dishonest trader asked for guidance on how to discern fair deals. A mother whose children had been quarreling sought wisdom on teaching patience and honesty. The village elders, who had initially doubted her authority and feared her insight, came forward to seek her advice on matters of governance and dispute resolution. Every interaction, every consultation reinforced the understanding that Ayanda was not dangerous, she was indispensable. In the days that followed, the village transformed. Decisions were no longer made hastily or in secret. People consulted Ayanda before entering disputes, before committing to agreements, and even before significant family matters were decided. Her reputation spread beyond the village borders, drawing travelers from neighboring communities who wished to witness her insight firsthand. They arrived cautiously, uncertain whether to fear or revere her, and left with the same understanding as the villagers. Ayanda's silver eyes revealed truth without malice, guidance without judgment, and wisdom without pride. Even the younger generation of villagers who had only heard tales of the mirror's strange powers, began to see Ayanda as a mentor. She taught them to observe carefully, to listen deeply, and to act with integrity. Her lessons were not imposed through fear, but through example. The calm decisiveness in her stride, the way she treated each person with fairness, and the way she allowed her own eyes to see the essence of their intentions. Children learned to trust the inner truth of people, to respect honesty, and to recognize the consequences of cruelty and envy. A week passed, then another, and slowly the old fear gave way to collective reverence. Villagers no longer whispered about Ayanda's powers as something to dread. They spoke openly of her guidance and celebrated the clarity she brought to their lives. The marketplace became a place where disputes could be resolved peacefully with her counsel. The fields prospered as her advice on planting and harvesting brought balance, and the social fabric of the village grew stronger, bound together by honesty and shared respect. The mirror had been a symbol, but Ayanda herself became the embodiment of insight and wisdom, her silver eyes the living reflection of the community's conscience. Even those who had attempted to harm her felt a subtle shift in their hearts. Guilt and fear intertwined with the recognition that she had never sought revenge through cruelty. She had allowed the Shards to enact their justice, and yet she walked among them with calm dignity, neither gloating nor punishing further. The village saw that her power was tempered with restraint, and in that restraint lay the true lesson. Justice was strongest when wielded with wisdom and mercy. In time, rituals and traditions began to evolve around her guidance. Annual gatherings celebrated the value of truth, the importance of honesty in commerce and personal life, and the recognition that the community's well-being depended on seeing clearly and acting wisely. Elders recounted the story of the shattered mirror not as a tale of fear, but as a testament to insight, morality, and the indestructible nature of truth. Children were taught that envy and malice could never extinguish what was pure and just, and that guidance often comes from those who see the world more clearly than others. Ayanda's presence became the anchor of the village. Every dispute, every moment of uncertainty, every decision that could affect the community's harmony was measured against her counsel. The fear that once kept people at a distance transformed into deep respect. The village recognized that the mirror had been merely a tool, a vessel for wisdom, but that the true source of guidance was Ayanda herself. Her sight, sharpened through adversity and loss, became the moral compass that kept the community united and vigilant against corruption, cruelty, and envy. Years passed, and the story of Ayanda's transformation, from a girl with a magical mirror to the woman whose eyes reflected truth and justice, became legend. Her silver eyes were revered as a symbol of clarity, fairness, and moral strength. The villagers' awakening had shifted the cultural foundation. Fear was replaced by respect, suspicion by trust, and malice by the understanding that wisdom and integrity could not be destroyed. The shattered mirror, once a source of envy and danger, was remembered only as the catalyst that revealed the greatness within Ayanda, a greatness that would guide the village for generations. The girl who once stood with a mirror in her hands, showing the hidden truths of others, was no longer just a girl. The mirror had been shattered, but instead of her losing power, the world shifted around her. The shards scattered across the village, carried in pockets of wind, buried in the soil and resting in the corners of homes. Those who dared to touch them felt a sting, sharp not only on their fingers but deep within their hearts. It was as though the pieces of glass had remembered every reflection they once carried, every lie they exposed, every shadow revealed. But the girl did not go looking for her broken mirror. She no longer needed it. Her eyes, once ordinary, had turned silver in the moonlight. Now when she looked at people she saw past their skin, their smiles, their gestures. She saw into the marrow of who they were, the secrets they clung to, the fears that ate at them, the desires they tried to bury. And though her gaze was piercing, it was not cruel. It was steady, quiet, unrelenting. At first, the villagers feared her even more. They whispered, "If her mirror is gone but her eyes are brighter, what else will she uncover? What else will she take from us?" Mothers pulled their children closer, and men lowered their heads when she passed. Yet slowly, something unexpected began to happen. The people who had once ridiculed her, who had once called her cursed, began to remember the truth of their wounds. Those who had cut themselves on the shards at night could not sleep, for the glass did not simply vanish from their flesh. It pulsed within them like tiny embers, burning whenever they tried to lie to themselves. A man who had stolen grain from his neighbor's storehouse could not hold food without feeling the slice of a phantom shard across his palm. A woman who had poisoned her sister's drink could not swallow water without tasting blood. These wounds were not punishments from the girl but awakenings, reminders that their own actions carried weight. One by one, villagers began to seek her out. They would come trembling, standing at the edge of her home, not daring to step too close. "Look at me," they would whisper. "Tell me what I have hidden." And when she lifted her silver eyes toward them, they would break down in tears, confessing the burdens they had carried for years. The girl never mocked them. She never raised her voice. She only listened, and when their words emptied out like rivers flooding from cracked stones, she would place her hand gently on theirs. "Truth does not destroy you," she told them. "It frees you." Soon her home became a gathering place. Not of crowds shouting or villagers pointing fingers, but of hushed voices, trembling hands, and souls longing to breathe without the weight of secrecy. The girl did not seek to lead, yet a new kind of reverence grew around her. The same people who had once shattered her mirror now protected her dwelling. They brought her food, water, and offerings not because she demanded it but because they wished to honor what she had become. A seer, a guide, a living reminder that truth, once revealed, could not be destroyed. And though she held no mirror, her legend grew alongside the scattered shards. Children would find glints of glass buried in the dirt or hidden under roots, and when they picked them up, their small hands trembled. Some would drop the pieces in fear, while others would clutch them tightly, unable to let go until they faced a truth about themselves. The villagers came to call these pieces the shards' tongues, for each shard seemed to whisper into the soul of whoever held it. Generations passed, and though the girl's body aged, her eyes remained silver, undimmed by time. She became known not simply as the girl with the mirror but as the keeper of truth. People traveled from other villages, other lands to kneel before her, to ask her what she saw within them. She never used her gift for judgment. Instead, she reminded each visitor, the mirror was never mine. It was always yours. When you look inward, you will find it too. Her story transformed into something larger than a single life. Around fires, elders spoke of her as both warning and hope. They told children, do not fear truth. Do not hide in lies, for every shard you bury will one day cut you. And when disputes arose among villagers, over land, over marriage, over betrayal, they would say, remember the girl whose mirror broke but whose eyes remained. Let us not break ourselves with denial. But her legacy did not end with stories. A strange thing happened as the years deepened. The shards themselves, scattered long ago, began to surface more often. They were found not only in the village but in rivers miles away, in mountains where no mirror had ever shattered, in deserts where no glass should have existed. Travelers claimed that the shards multiplied as if truth itself, once released, could never be contained again. Wherever a shard was found, change followed. Entire families admitted wrongs long buried. Leaders who hoarded power fell sick until they confessed their greed. Lovers who betrayed each other could no longer meet without the sting of glass in their skin. Some feared this, calling it a curse that spread too wide. But others began to call it the blessing of the shards. For every wound it gave was also a wound that healed once faced. Villages that had lived in secrecy and corruption for generations found themselves slowly purified, not by law, not by punishment, but by the relentless reflection of truth. And the girl, now a woman of many years, watched this with quiet wonder. She had not asked for her mirror to break. She had not asked to be a seer. Yet she understood now, the breaking was never an ending. It was a beginning. The mirror's destruction was its greatest gift, for truth does not live in a single object. Truth multiplies when it is broken, like seeds scattered to the wind, each taking root in unexpected soil. When she finally lay down in her last days, the villagers gathered around her, not with fear but with gratitude. They asked her, what will become of us when you are gone? She smiled, her silver eyes still gleaming, and whispered, I was never the keeper of truth. You are. Every shard that cuts you, every reflection you dare to face, that is the mirror now. Carry it. Let it multiply. Let it never die. And with that she closed her eyes, her body returning to the earth. But her legacy did not fade. Across the land, stories of the girl with the mirror became a lesson passed from generation to generation. That truth cannot be destroyed. That lies may shatter glass but only scatter its light further. That to face oneself is the greatest courage. In time, shrines were built not to her image but to shards of glass, glowing faintly in the sun. Pilgrims carried them as amulets, not for protection, but as reminders that no secret stays hidden forever. And in every village where a shard was found, her name was spoken. The seer of silver eyes, the girl of the shards, the one who showed that truth multiplies when broken. Thus her story did not end with her death. It lived in every hand cut by glass, in every confession spoken at night, in every child who dared to look into a shard and not turn away. And so, her legacy became eternal. Truth, once revealed, never again could be silenced. The story of the girl who had once been locked away in a room of mirrors did not fade with the breaking of her prison. It spread, like smoke carried by the wind, weaving itself into the conversations of elders, into the songs sung at dusk, and into the whispered warnings that mothers gave their children. But her tale was more than just a memory of suffering. It was the story of a transformation that no chains, no cruelty, and no shattered glass could ever erase. When the mirrors broke, the villagers thought they had destroyed her. They thought that by smashing the reflections that once bound her, they had erased her power. But they did not realize the truth of mirrors, that their shards cut deeper than the whole glass ever could. And so the proverb was born, one that would echo across generations. Those who shatter truth will bleed by its shards. This saying did not come from the lips of a king, nor was it written in the scrolls of chiefs. It came from the wound of the girl's suffering and the brilliance of her survival. The villagers themselves became witnesses of its meaning, for many of them carried scars on their hands and feet from the day the mirrors fell. The blood they spilled was not merely from glass but from guilt, the price of refusing to see what had always been in front of them. A new fire in the village. At first the people were afraid to approach her. She had walked out of her broken prison with silver eyes that gleamed like moonlight, eyes that seemed to pierce into souls. They whispered among themselves, "She sees what we hide. She knows the lies we carry. She is not of us anymore." But slowly their fear gave way to something else. When disputes rose between neighbors, she spoke softly and cut through their quarrels with a single sentence that revealed both sides of the truth. When a man lied to his wife, she turned her gaze upon him and his tongue faltered, as if the silver in her eyes burned away his excuses. When children fought, she knelt beside them and spoke of what truly stirred in their hearts: jealousy, hunger for love, the yearning to be seen. Her sight was no longer outward, reflected by mirrors, it was inward. She could see not the skin but the soul, not the mask but the face beneath. And the villagers who once feared her began to seek her out. They came with questions. They came with wounds that could not be healed with herbs. They came with guilt heavy in their chests, hoping her silver gaze would make them honest again. What began as whispers of fear turned into murmurs of reverence. They no longer called her cursed. They called her seer, a legend born. Seers had existed in stories before her, women who spoke with the spirits, men who read omens in the flight of birds, children who carried the gift of dreams. But her story was different. She had not been born with her gift. She had been forged in it. Her prison of mirrors had been meant to break her, to trap her in reflections until she forgot herself. But instead, it sharpened her like a blade, and when the mirrors fell, the blade turned outward. The elders began to tell her story around the fire. They spoke of the girl who had endured silence in the mirror room, who had learned to see even when her eyes could no longer look upon herself. They told it as a warning to those who thought truth could be destroyed. They told it as a comfort to those who suffered unjustly. For in every generation, there are those who wish to silence the truth, those who build prisons of lies, those who think that by breaking the mirror they will erase what it reflects. And in every generation the proverb reminds them, those who shatter truth will bleed by its shards. The weight of guidance. Her life did not become easy simply because she was revered. In fact, it became heavier. People came to her not just for answers but for absolution. They wanted her to free them from their own guilt, to carry the burden of their secrets. She learned that seeing truth is both a gift and a curse. Sometimes she longed for the quiet of her old prison, the silence of glass walls where only her own reflection existed. Out in the world, the noise of human hearts was louder than any chain. But she endured because she knew the purpose of her gift was not for herself but for others. Still, she never forgot the pain of her youth. And so, whenever she gave guidance, she spoke gently. She reminded people not only of their wrongs but also of their possibilities. She showed them that truth was not a blade meant to cut them down, but a light meant to guide their steps. The passing of the seer. Years passed, and the girl who had once been locked in mirrors became a woman, then an elder. The silver in her eyes never faded, and though her body grew frail, her sight remained sharper than any blade. When she walked through the village, even children hushed in awe. They said her shadow carried more weight than her body. And when her final days approached, she called the people to gather. Beneath the same tree where elders had once mocked her, she sat, her silver gaze sweeping across the faces of those she had guided all her life. I was once broken, she told them. And yet from that breaking, truth multiplied. Remember this, truth cannot be destroyed. If you bury it, it will rise. If you silence it, it will find another voice. And if you shatter it, it will cut you. Her last words were not cries of sorrow but a reminder of the proverb. She spoke it one last time. Those who shatter truth will bleed by its shards. Then she closed her eyes and the village wept, not for her suffering but for the gift she had given them. The generations after. The villagers carved her story into wood, painted it onto walls, sang it into songs. Children grew up hearing about the silver-eyed seer. Mothers told their sons never to hide lies, for truth would always return. Fathers warned their daughters that those who mock others may one day kneel before them. And the proverb lived on. It was spoken when disputes broke out. It was whispered when rulers tried to silence dissent. It was carved on the gates of homes as protection. It was sung in rituals when the people asked the spirits to keep their hearts honest. Her legend became more than a story of one girl. It became a mirror for the entire people. For in her suffering they saw their own weakness. In her transformation, they saw their own potential. The final light. Long after her bones returned to dust, travelers came to the village seeking her wisdom. They asked, "Where is the girl of mirrors?" And the villagers would smile and say, "She walks still, not in flesh but in truth. Look into yourself. If you dare to face your reflection, you will find her." For the girl's legacy was not her silver eyes or her guidance. It was the reminder that truth, once released, lives in everyone. And that those who try to destroy it will only end up destroying themselves. And so the tale closes as all tales must, with the weight of its teaching. Not in sorrow but in light. Not in chains but in freedom. Not in silence but in a voice that still echoes. Those who shatter truth will bleed by its shards. And the echo does not fade. It multiplies. Her story became not just a warning but a light, passed from lip to lip, from fire to fire, from heart to heart. In every corner of the land, when people looked at one another and dared to speak the truth, they remembered her. And in remembering they kept her alive forever.